If you're not providing AI tools to your employees, they're using them anyway. And whether they're using them on your equipment and on your servers versus on their own time, ideally you want to give them the tools so all the information that you have is properly managed. Ideally, the right privacy settings are on there, that nothing's coming back to a public model, that you don't have any confidential information that's going back to that, and that the employees really understand those guardrails around it. So if you're not doing that, you should.
Welcome to another episode of From Lab to Patient, Garage to Market, with your host, Phil Crowley.
Hello and welcome. Thanks for tuning into our podcast. We look to bring to you leaders in the life sciences and technology who can share their perspectives on developments in those areas. How to succeed, mistakes to avoid, and issues to be aware of. We're trying to demystify the process of getting your great ideas to the marketplace, hopefully to enrich the lives of thousands or even millions of people. Today, I'm happy to have with us my guest, Ms. Jennifer Hill, who's the Chief Executive Officer of ThoughtRiver. ThoughtRiver is a company that's focused on using artificial intelligence tools to accelerate processes in law firms as they work to support their clients. She has over 20 years of experience strategically growing startups to profitability and successful exits. Now, I'd ask you to stay tuned because at the end of our discussion, I'm going to ask Jennifer to give you a couple of tips from her broad experience on things that you can focus on to help you be successful in your pursuit of technology development. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, please tell us a little bit about your background and the pathway that led you to your current position.
Sure. As you mentioned, I am the CEO of ThoughtRiver, which is an AI contract review company for law firms and in-house teams. Unsurprisingly, I am an attorney. I am a former corporate and M&A and venture capital and startup attorney, and I worked for two firms, Fenwick and West and Gunderson, Dettmer, both in the Bay Area and in New York, for many years, working on all different sides of every transaction. And the reason I think that's relevant is that technology has been the foundation of everything that I've done since I graduated college, whether it was working in enterprise software companies and operating or business development roles, to then becoming an attorney representing all sorts of technology companies and serial M&A acquirers, to then going in-house as the chief operating and legal officer of a health tech company, which I was at from startup through exit and integration to the parent, until now being at ThoughtRiver and leading a legal tech company at the forefront of AI. So quite a different journey for an attorney and a really fun one.
Well, that's really interesting. I noticed in your background that you not only got your JD degree, but you got an MBA degree at the same time. That's a lot of work to do that. When did you decide that you wanted to move over from the traditional legal counselor side to the business side and kind of roll up your sleeves and actually operate a company?
Great question. It actually started in college. One of the many jobs that I had in college was teaching public speaking to grad students. And most of the grad students were either computer science engineers or electrical engineers or MBA students. And I realized by teaching them both how to communicate and work effectively in business and technical teams, particularly in the late 90s in Silicon Valley, I attended Stanford. So there were lots of early stage companies that we all know and love now that we were hearing about at that time. And I realized a couple of things. The first is that the law is always behind technology, but can be an enabler of it. And two, from the students that I met of both technology and business disciplines, I really liked how they approached leadership and building was something I always enjoyed myself. And while I realized that I didn't necessarily have to give up one for the other, that pursuing a joint degree would give me the skills and the background and experience to be able to exercise both of those interests and skill sets in a variety of different ways.
That's really interesting because I found that among my clients and people that I speak to in the technology areas, that there's a tremendous focus on the technology, but you seem to have focused a bit more on the people skills. And I've found over the years that sometimes the people skills or lack of people skills get in the way of actually succeeding. And you've had a lot of experience in kind of building diverse teams. What do you look for in people so that you know that they can play nice in the sandbox together and actually get things done?
The first is a shared vision. Can they align on a vision? Doesn't necessarily mean that they need to all believe it to the same degree of fervor, but for the given situation, can they at least align on it enough to cooperate? The second is, can they be active listeners and respect everybody else on that team? Because everyone has different perspectives to bring, and that's often how you get the best outcomes, is having that diverse set of perspectives. And the third is people who really are enthusiastic about it. Are they interested in solving problems? Are they passionate about doing that work, scratching that itch of solving the problem, or working with that particular team? And you find that when you've got those things, the active listening, the vision, and the interest and that drive, you can make really amazing things happen with different teams.
So is it that combination of those factors, and I particularly like your focus on enthusiasm about things, because work at a startup is not just a straight line. I mean, there are always setbacks and problems and difficulties to overcome. How do you figure out whether or not the team that you're working with or that you are being asked to join has what it takes?
Sometimes you only can learn based on how much time you have and experience, and you changes along the way. I mean, it's kind of similar things to managing a sports team or anything like that. Resilience is obviously helpful. In a perfect world, you'd get to interview every member of your team before building it and make sure that you're compatible on that, but that's not the reality. In most situations, it's serendipitous, so you're dropped into a team and you make do with what you have, but you also realize that if you assume good intentions for everyone and you assume that most people really want to learn and improve, that's something that you can work with. And also respecting the fact that people aren't going to be resilient in equal measure and helping them understand how they can become more resilient. And often looking at their peers or the rest of the team or other teams that are adjacent to them that have those skills. And you can really help build that. And in some cases, people will come further along the curve than others. But giving them the opportunity to do that, and again, if you've got the enthusiasm and the listening and the desire, you can accomplish a lot. But, full disclosure, sometimes it doesn't work out either.
And those are the people that you have to invite to develop their career in a place that's more aligned with what their interests are, which is otherwise known as letting them go.
Although sometimes it's finding a different role where they can be successful or finding a lane. There are some folks that are really good individual contributors and that's what they want to be, and that's fine. There's a place for that.
Right.
Not every team works differently. And as we know, work is becoming more fractional and ad hoc. And that's the way that even when you're full-time employees, that changes. One of the things that I've learned and that I've always said to my own teams is that every 6 months, your role has to be evolving because we've automated something, we've had more people join the team, or we've learned how to just continuously improve. And if in 6 months to a year to 18 months, none of that is changing, then we got to look at what the individual's doing and what the company's doing and what the team's doing, because everybody wants to evolve. The days of having your job be the same every single day, we know those days are over. And with AI, they are rapidly reducing.
Well, you raise an interesting point. I mean, you've devoted yourself and your company to using AI tools to help lawyers. And of course, there are people who run around with their hair on fire saying, artificial intelligence is going to destroy all our jobs. I mean, what's your particular perspective on this? Because to a certain extent, you are dispensing the tonic, in terms of the artificial intelligence, but also trying to help people understand how it can help them enhance their roles as well.
Right. And all of the answers are right. So are there some jobs, like in many industries, that go away because of technology? Yes. Will the shift be as dramatic as everyone's saying? I mean, even this week in particular, there's been loads of thought pieces about how AI is destroying all white collar jobs within 1 to 5 years. And we're going to be on universal income to, the pace of change is going to be much slower. And that people who adopt AI tools are obviously going to be in a much better position than those who don't. If I look at the legal profession, we know that the current pace of the way that the legal profession goes is that it is often very expensive and not always accessible.
Right.
And those are ways in which technology, I think, can really help. It can extend the impact of the lawyer. It can bring about different business models. It can allow more people to access legal services. It can essentially lead to more consumption. And we found with many technology tools that it doesn't necessarily mean there's a reduction in force, it's an increase in consumption, which means that it's more likely that more people will be around. I can say in particular for contract review, the days of folks reviewing the same agreement 500 or 600 times a year, AI can help with that.
Right.
Does it mean that it is devoid of human interaction? Not at all. The attorney's thought is essential. Does it raise questions about how attorneys are trained in an apprenticeship profession? absolutely does. But if we look at these tools as a way to extend impact, to increase training, to gain knowledge and to impart knowledge faster, then it creates a whole new lens of them being helpful.
Well, does that mean that the nature of lawyer education needs to change? I mean, there has always been this focus on, well, do we train lawyers to pass the bar exam, or do we train lawyers to be critical thinkers? Is the answer now, well, do we train lawyers to be artificial intelligence programmers so that they have a job when they come out of law school?
Well, the thing that I've noticed, and I'd be curious if you've noticed this too, playing with AI, I mean, we've practiced for years and years and years, and we learned the old-fashioned way, which was through the apprenticeship model. I mean, my first months of being a junior associate, I made loads of tables in Word, not even Excel, in Word of contract terms. And now AI can do all that and slice and dice it in a million different ways with the click of a mouse. And that's awesome. And that really helps. But are you learning things in the same way? That is where education is going to have to evolve. AI, much like any kind of computer-based learning, can help us learn things faster, but there still has to be an engagement with that material. I sometimes look at AI the same way that I look at my children, and I have 2 middle schoolers, how they're engaging with the computer and whether they are learning things more because they're reading it, they're learning things faster because they're reading something on a screen versus they're printing something out and engaging with the material. And for certain things, one works better than the other, but I feel like it's this combination of an approach. You're still going to have to learn the law. You're still going to have to be able to pass the bar, but critical thinking is going to be even more important. Where I think these tools can help is that it frees up time in the day for attorneys to connect. And I always say some of the best education I got as a junior associate, and frankly at any part of my legal career, wasn't sitting in my office reviewing an agreement or looking at a markup that a partner had done. It was sitting around a conference room table where somebody presses the mute button on a speakerphone and you're hearing all of the different attorneys give their opinion, or a senior attorney explaining that what you just heard actually means something else, or here's what we're going to do. And it's all of that stuff that is really hard for AI to replicate because there's no roadmap. It is essentially critical thinking, and you get that from engaging with other people in your field. So to the extent that technology tools can free up more time for that kind of interaction, it actually means a very different type of learning.
Well, it seems that you're articulating a view that it would be helpful for people to think about going back to the office so that they can have time for those random one-on-one kind of interactions that you can have when you're in a physical setting, as opposed to trying to schedule time for a Zoom session with somebody about something with people who are typically incredibly busy.
I think both help. I mean, nothing beats interpersonal interaction, but at the same time, if you add long commutes and responsibilities of home and life, there is a place for both remote work and in-person work. And when you find the cadence that works for your team, that's what makes a difference. It's both the kind of work you do, the level of seniority you have on your team, and how those people work. I mean, I've run remote teams of all different sizes for many, many years. And COVID was obviously the stress test for all of that. And so I think that's entirely dependent on skills and how well you communicate with others, how well you can leverage people on the team. You know, you can still hit the mute button. You may have to be in a different Zoom room, or it may be after the call with the client to make sure that you're not saying anything inappropriate, but it can happen in different ways. I'm not saying we all got to go back to the office 5 days a week, but there is actually, as we all know, huge benefits to being able to be in the same room together more often.
Are there different skill sets that leaders need as they deal with the remote teams to try to make sure that they're engaged the same way that at least we like to think they were when everybody was in the same office?
Yes. Some of it is about understanding who's on your team and how they learn, and making sure that depending on how large your team is, if you've got other managers and whatnot, that they understand the conditions where their team works best. Certainly with remote work, you have to be more intentional about check-ins to make sure how people are doing. Are they getting what they need? Some people will always raise their hand. They'll put something on a Slack channel, or they will outreach on their own. In other cases, you have to go to them and meet them where they are. It's much easier to meet somebody where they are if you bump into them in the kitchen than it is doing it on Zoom. So you do have to be more intentional about those communications. But it can definitely be done. There's plenty of successful companies that have remote first workforces, and they create different cultures and different standards about communicating with each other, or different kinds of check-ins that work for them.
So it sounds like being more intentional about check-ins is one of the key skill sets that leaders need to have when they're trying to manage remote teams effectively.
It is. I would also say over communicate. I mean, my team right now is split between the US and the UK.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have time zone challenges as well.
Right.
And even though it's only 5 hours from the East Coast to the UK, that's essentially half a workday. And so we've developed a way for that to work very well. So some of it is check-ins. Some of it is over communicating things. Sometimes you have a small team that may always be on the same page. It doesn't mean that every last person in the company does. I have found that once I feel like we are over communicating and we're tired of hearing the same points over and over, that's probably the level that it needs to be to make sure that everyone's on the same page. The other is having flexible tools, very easy ways to get information, very easy ways to access shared work files. And obviously with a gazillion different software programs, you can do that very easily now. So we have all the different tech tools to make that work, but you still have to check in with a human element.
All right. I'd like to take just a moment now before we get to the next topic to talk a little bit about Crowley Law. We are a boutique law firm of 4 very experienced lawyers who are passionate about helping life sciences and other technology entrepreneurs avoid being taken advantage of as they pursue their dreams, to take great ideas from the laboratory bench to the patient's bedside, or from the garage to the marketplace, hopefully to enrich the lives of thousands or millions of people. I'm a former research scientist. I did my work in superconductivity until I figured out that it would be a long time before things that I was doing in the lab was actually going to help people. And so I switched over to law and have found it to be a remarkable experience in terms of my understanding how difficult it is for you entrepreneurs out there to create new knowledge, new business ideas, and then as a corporate lawyer to understand how difficult it is to take those ideas, which may be great ideas, and bring them to the marketplace. And it's a wonderful activity that you are involved in taking technology to shape our societies and improve our societies, and we're dedicated to helping you. In fact, I've encapsulated some of what I know into a book that you can find on Amazon. It's called Avoid Startup Failure. Learn the top 10 causes of failure for technology startups and how to turn them to your advantage. And if you Google Philip P. Crowley on Amazon, you'll be able to see it. We have Kindle version, a softcover version, an Audible version for those of you who like to listen to books while you're jogging or doing other things. And just remember, call us if you have an issue on which you need help. We're here to help. CrowleyLawLLC.com. All right, Jennifer, back to you. Recently, in February of 2026, as we're recording this, the Wall Street Journal had a very interesting article about the use of enterprise-wide artificial intelligence systems and how the systems can basically extract not only what the result of a particular decision-making process has been, but also the thinking process that experienced business people, knowledge workers have gained over many, many years. And, they have their own methodologies, which presumably, if you use all of the corporate artificial intelligence tools, is captured in the tool. And eventually, is there a risk that you no longer need that person because you've taken their decision-making process and incorporated that into your AI models so that you can have the AI system think just like the human being thinks? What do you think of that?
That's happening already, regardless of whether the human is in the loop or not. I mean, that is what these agentic systems are designed to do. It is to go through that step-by-step decision-making process in order to get to an outcome. And some of that is reasoning, some of that is probability, and it's understanding enough where it's figuring out the next step. As we know, when we prompt a lot of these systems, they're very good at doing all sorts of different tasks. But at the same time, upon further questioning, they've also been known to engage in deception and doubling down and on wrong answers or on their own path, or even giving the wrong path to say they came about it this way as opposed to the other way. What I would say that I think was really interesting about that article were 2 things that struck me. The first is that employers of any company should know if you're not providing AI tools to your employees, they're using them anyway. and whether they're using them on your equipment and on your servers versus on their own time, ideally you want to give them the tools so all the information that you have is properly managed. Ideally, the right privacy settings are on there, that nothing's coming back to a public model, that you don't have any confidential information that's going back to that, and that the employees really understand those guardrails around it. So if you're not doing that, you should. The other thing that struck me was for employees that really feel like their knowledge is being captured in an enterprise system, and therefore they'd rather use AI somewhere else. I mean, that is both an enterprise risk and a personal risk, particularly if they are using information from their employer and confidential information in something that's not tied out of that. I mean, that could be a misuse of that information, and that creates a risk for both. So I'm all in favor of giving them tools and making sure that those tools are properly managed so that people can experiment. We just simply won't know until we get to the future how it's going to change. And I know that sounds like really general and a platitude, and at some level it is, but given how quickly AI is changing, it's very easy for us to jump to paranoia, some of which is quite useful, because ideally it gets people to realize they have to understand how to use these tools, because people who use them will definitely be more effective in the future of work than people that are totally avoiding them. Also, people that know how to harness them properly, use them properly, and kind of manage that to expand the impact of their own work. And that's really where the difference lies. So will that replace your job? You don't know. That's where you get back to, are you managing teams? Are there human skills? Are you able to curate? Are you able to engage the enterprise and move it forward in a way where AI is not directing people and teams? As it continues to move forward towards superintelligence, things will continue to change again. But for now, understanding how to use them and learning as quickly as you can and using them safely is obviously something that benefits your career.
Well, your perception and your analysis of that is very much like my analysis of change management generally. When I started to learn to ski, I kind of sat back on my skis, which really inhibited my ability to control where I was going. But once I learned that the real way to control things was to engage, was to get out over the front of the skis, and you have more control. You may not go exactly where you intend to wind up, but you'll have much more control over what happens. And what you're saying is that people should embrace these tools and learn to use them. The analogy I like to give for people who are alarmed by all these changes in technology is that, well, if you were a buggy whip manufacturer or a buggy whip manufacturer employee in 1899, you probably had a very, very successful business. By about 1919, 10 years later, you as the buggy whip manufacturer had to figure out how you were going to supply things to the automobile manufacturers, and your workers had to figure out, well, how am I going to learn to work in the automobile industry, because buggies seem to be going away. And so I tend to be, as a former scientist, I tend to be pretty optimistic about technology change because human beings have been through it so many times over the centuries. And although the alarmists always look at the downside, eventually it has resulted over the years in higher standards of living and better jobs for people generally. But one of the great concerns about all of these tools involves cybersecurity. How do you handle that at ThoughtRiver?
Oh, goodness. That is always top of mind, from making sure that we're ISO 27001 certified to the policies and procedures that we deploy within our company. I mean, we understand that attorneys using this have privilege to manage as part of it as well. So we hold ourselves to a very high standard and make sure that we're on the forefront, not only of regulation, but also cybersecurity itself in the way that we build our product.
So it's not only a set of procedures, but it's auditing, it is operationalizing what's on the paper, because the things that I have seen sometimes, I was a former FDA counsel at Johnson & Johnson. I'd see people have wonderful procedures, but they didn't follow the procedures. And so much mischief ensues when that happens.
That is true. People are your biggest liability, but they're also can be the most easily taught. And so being able to do it in a way that is bite-sized, that is consistent, that is digestible, and makes it seem like these practices are not arduous, they're pretty simple, and there's a reason why, makes adoption easier. So much like with any product, you want to make adoption by your users the easiest it can possibly be. The same thing goes for cybersecurity protocols.
Well, you've been kind of on the forefront of application of artificial intelligence to work. What do you like most about what you do?
Oh gosh, the pace of change is so interesting. And as an attorney, coming up with ways in which we can scale our impact is really interesting to me. There's only so many hours one can bill in a day, but being able to use technology to expand our impact, that is really interesting to me. I also meet the most fascinating people, both from an engineering side, from a client side. Understanding where people are in their journey of technology adoption is really interesting, particularly as we spoke about earlier, understanding how people connect, why teams are resilient, why change management works or doesn't work. All of those things, aspects to my job. So what I appreciate most about it is having that mix of things. I'm able to think about the law and apply it in a very different way for a very different purpose. And so that creates and brings together a lot of the skill sets that I value and that I enjoy exercising.
All right, Jennifer, what one or two key features or pieces of advice would you give to entrepreneurs who are looking to succeed in the technology space that you have taken from the tremendous experience you have had representing startup companies, serving as a senior executive of startup companies, and then helping those companies grow and develop over the years?
So the first is everything takes longer than you think it is, no matter what your intentions are. I wish I could speed up time in so many different ways. I think the second is never underestimate the power of the people on your team, not only because of what it can bring you, but also in terms of the joy of working day to day. The cycle is like this. It's not a straight emotional line at any point in a startup. And so the people that are along for your journey are just as important as the direction that you're headed and the journey that you experience along the way. Always remember that creativity comes from sometimes left field completely, and you have to be open to where really good ideas or something that will solve your problem will come from. So always be open.
How much of a factor do you think is grit in being able to be successful as an entrepreneur?
I think that's certainly some of it. The entrepreneurial groups that I'm in and when I speak to other entrepreneurs, I mean, that is part of it, but grit is also something that everyone wants to tell the same story. Something bad happened, I buckled down, and the ending was awesome. We all want to tell that story. And we do in a lot of different ways, but you also have to hear the stories of something wasn't going well. I buckled down for a long time and it didn't work, and I knew when to pivot or I knew when to move on to something else. Understanding that it's not all a Hollywood movie in the end, because when we internalize that everything's perfect all the time, then you start kind of questioning things in a way that's just not realistic, and you end up creating unrealistic standards for yourself, but also for your team. So it is a part of it, but I think grit is not just in those really deep moments of challenge, it's also the day-to-day.
Right.
Grit looks like different things to different people, and sometimes just being able to get up again and continue moving forward, even when you've got things that are great, to get to that next thing. Realize grit doesn't look the same for everybody in every situation, and that's part of it.
Jennifer, thanks so much for sharing your perspectives. The time has flown by. I'm sure our viewers and listeners will find this very valuable. If they'd like to learn more about ThoughtRiver and the work of your company, how can they get in contact with you or look at the company's work?
Two ways: to go to ThoughtRiver.com. You can learn all about who we are. You can follow us on LinkedIn. And you can also follow me if you put Jennifer Hill in ThoughtRiver. There are lots of Jennifer Hills, but you can find that. Then you can follow me in the company as well.
Super, Jennifer. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your perspectives. I always like to give my audience an opportunity to learn from successful executives like you who have done the work, who have walked the path of entrepreneur, and have stories and perspectives to share that show what it's really like out there, and to encourage them and inspire them to continue to take the work and the job of bringing great ideas to the marketplace, from the laboratory bench to the patient's bedside, from the garage to the marketplace, to improve the lives of thousands or millions of people. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great fun to connect.
Thanks for listening to From Lab to Patient, Garage to Market, with host Phil Crowley. Please be sure to follow and leave a review or comment on your favorite platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website at crowleylawllc.com. The information provided in this podcast does not constitute legal advice, and there has been no attorney-client relationship formed in the viewing or listening of this podcast episode. The information provided may constitute attorney advertising under applicable bar rules.